Hello, welcome to Chapter 3 Podcast, the show for readers of science fiction, fantasy, and romance. This is Season 1, Episode 22. I'm Bethany, and joining me today are return guests, Liene from the YouTube channel Liene's Library, and Angela from Literature Science Alliance. We are going to be talking about our favorite fantasy authors and books, which I'm very excited about. If you enjoyed the podcast, I would really appreciate it if you'd take a moment to rate and review us so we can continue to reach more listeners. And if you are interested in getting early access to episodes and exclusive bonus content from our guests, consider supporting us on Patreon. Huge thanks to all of our supporting patrons, including our world-expanding patron, Trina. You all make this possible. As a reminder, the On My Radar segment is now at the end of the episode, so be sure to keep listening for upcoming book recommendations. With that said, Angela and Liene, thank you guys for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us again, and this time we just get to talk about things we love.
Yeah, we don't have to argue.
I'm gonna say, like, we sneak that in anyway, so Bethany was like, instead of trying to herd these cats, why don't we just let them bring up the stuff that they bring up anyway?
You know, we can talk about things we like. I mean, we may also disagree on things we like, which is fine, so it might just naturally happen, which, you know. Okay, so Liene and Angela both have YouTube channels, which will be linked in the show notes. Go check them out. But we're going to talk about like specific books and authors, but I thought maybe an interesting place to start might be what makes, this is going to be a two-part question, so we'll do part one first, but what makes a favorite author for you? And then what makes you love a fantasy book? So we could start with, how do you decide that an author is now a favorite author? Like, what does that look like for you?
You want to go first, Liene?
I was gonna say, do you want to go first, Angela? Well, I'm gonna say, like, oh, sorry about the traffic noise. I don't know if you can hear that.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna say, like, it's once in a while I'll read a book that, like, based on that one book alone, that author is an author. They wrote that thing, and I don't need to know anything else. But most of the time, I have to read a few things from them, and they have to continue to impress me across at least a few books for me to be like, okay, this author, they know what they're doing. I trust them. I'll read probably anything they write because so far they haven't let me down.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Patrick Rothfuss, obviously, like, he's only written like 2 books, so he's a favorite author, but I mean, he's only ever basically written the one thing. But I would read anything he would write. But I'm thinking my favorite author, Neil Gaiman, I mean, everything I've read from him has impressed me. Even the stuff I don't like that much, I'm always impressed with what he brings to the table. So as long as an author consistently demonstrates something to me, it may not always be my favorite thing they've written, but they're consistently delivering something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's probably similar for me. So, like, I for sure, like, as I've read more and more books, have been pickier about, like, what I say is, like, a favorite author versus, like, a favorite work. Because, like, some people have only written, like, 1 or 2 things, and if I read those 2 and I love them, that's great, but maybe they're both in the same series and I'm just obsessed with those characters. So normally if I've, like, read at least 2 or 3 things by them that are, like, separate works, and, like, all of them have been, like, 4 to 5 stars, and that normally has to do with, like, the characters. Normally they write character interactions in a way that really work for me, especially in fantasy. Like, if we're talking fantasy authors specifically, that's what I care the most about. It's different for, like, literary fiction and sci-fi. Like, I have different internal parameters for those things, but, like, for fantasy, I'm there to watch a bunch of people get into a situation together, and the fun part for me is, like, how the author brings that to life.
That's so interesting, because I think I do like that, but that is not the only thing that would make me love a fantasy. Like, yeah, we'll have to talk more about this, but yeah, I mean, I generally would agree that similarly, it's going to be an author who has consistently shown that they write books that I love. Or, you know, I mean, this isn't fantasy specifically, but, like, or an author where I never hate anything they like, and I frequently love what they write. So, like, Silvia Moreno-Garcia would be a good example of that for me, where I've never disliked anything I've read from her, and a handful of her books I adore. So I would
I think it is
probably
also
then.
important to me that an author isn't just sort of resting on their laurels, that they're
Yeah.
consistently demonstrating. Again, this is where I don't have to always love it, but I like to see an author who's trying to stretch and trying to expand and trying to challenge themselves to take on either longer or darker or different or whatever, and dipping their toes and trying to expand on what they do and how they do it, because that it just shows me that they're not stagnating, and so that me as a reader, I will never find myself bored with their writing because they're never just being churning out the same old thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and kind of with that, like, I want them to always be growing and challenging themselves, but I also love when I can expect a certain level of quality or authorial voice. Like, I feel like we all agree that Jemisin works can be different across series, but it's always obviously like, that's N.K. Jemisin, that's her voice.
Yeah.
So I like kind of knowing that I'm going to have at least a good time when I pick up a book by a favorite author. Like, maybe they're trying something new and it won't 100% work, but I like when they have a certain baseline quality to them.
Yeah, favorite author is somebody that I feel safe in their hands. I mean, I've read enough from you that whatever journey you're taking me on, I trust you. You lead me wherever you want to lead me this time. Let's just see where this goes. I'm not, whereas new books or new authors, things that I don't have that, they aren't a favorite, so they're still earning that place if they ever want it, or it's a debut. I'm still, as a reader, I'm sitting there going, is this, or where are we going with this, or I don't know. Whereas if it's a favorite author, I just go with it, whatever it is. And at the end, it may not have turned out to be my favorite of their works, but I will just go with it and trust them.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting, too, because an author for me that has earned that, like an author that I've read for a long time or read in a world for a long time, then they can put out a book that I could maybe say, okay, if somebody is starting with this book, objectively it's not perfect, but I'm gonna maybe love the experience of reading it just because I've so much fallen in love with the characters and the writing style and the world, which I always think is an interesting feeling, where I'm like, yeah, I can see your critiques of it, but I don't care because I love this thing.
I feel like that exact sentence is something that you've directed at me so many times.
That is probably true.
Literally word for word. I'm pretty sure I can find that in my comment section from you.
I would not be shocked.
I'm a big believer in that a book can have flaws just so much as I don't notice it while I'm reading it.
Bringing in a flaw, I mean, especially with art, what is a flaw? It's always beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So unless we're talking about literally like the grammar, which, there are times when that is not up to par, which is, yikes to that. But aside from something as purely structural as the grammar, pretty much everything is up for debate and interpretation. So
yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so Angela, you kind of touched on this, but I do want to talk about like what makes a favorite fantasy book for you. Like what are the things that might cause a book to like rise to that level? I feel like for me it's complicated and it can be a lot of different things, but I'm curious.
It's a lot of things, and I've been reading fantasy in all age levels for so long. Different things have captured my attention at different points. I always do say that, like, I think now I'm definitely more patient with slow-paced fantasy, and I actually really do like a good slow burn setup of a fantasy book, especially if the character work can back it up. But like I've always said that I'm a world-building driven kind of fantasy reader. Like, if the intrigue of the mystery of the world is there and done in a compelling way, that's like a big hook for me. My least favorite thing in a fantasy that you have to work really hard to overcome is magic is leaving the world. I'm really done with it. I'm bored with it. I want magic, sort of thing. So like that's one that like I've just learned recently, maybe in the last year or so. It's like, oh, if this is in a book, the author really has to sell me on why they're doing this in a unique way that's compelling because you took away the cool magic part, sort of thing. But I don't know. It's really hard because like I feel like my two favorite fantasy authors do the different things.
You should do like an ad. Remember those old Hostess ads that were like, "Where's the cream filling?" That's you. Where's the magic?
Where's the magic filling?
Yeah.
And like some authors can do it in compelling ways and make up for it in other parts of the storytelling. They start at like a lower tier versus like I love when magic is coming back. Like there are lots of new fantasy I read this year, like with there were 2 releases this spring and summer where both of them had this intrigue of like magic has been absent for a bit, but now it's returning in mysterious ways and is having these side effects. And it's like, that's some of my favorite stuff. I don't know why, but I like when magic misbehaves. I like when it's coming back. And I do love a good apocalypse in a fantasy book and like dying earth stuff. I like a lot of those things.
Interesting. Yeah, I think like if there's a thing that I love about a book, I can forgive a lot of other things not being there, if that makes any sense. So like if I love the characters in a book and I'm really invested in those characters and their plot arc, I don't really care if it's plot driven. I don't mind what the world building is like. I'm going to have a good time with it. Also, like if I'm really into the world and the mystery or the like politics of a book and the characters are like mediocre, but I'm really into everything else about it, I'll be like, "Oh, that's fine. I can still really love this book even if like the character work isn't incredible." So like yeah, like I think for me, it's a lot about my experience of it, of how much am I enjoying myself, and like I don't have to have everything be perfect in one book. I mean, if it all is great, like, which is why things like the Broken Earth trilogy just like blow my mind because like N.K. Jemisin does everything brilliantly, and I'm like, wow, okay, awesome. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I'm just thinking of my 2 favorite fantasy series, and they like both do things differently. Like, I love the Stormlight Archives, which is like the definition of like epic, large, slow burn fantasy with like very explosive moments, and then like the Broken Earth trilogy. But both of them have like apocalyptic scenarios and like unknown magic systems. But I don't know. If like what you were saying, it really doesn't matter as long as something else pulls through. But if I were to like just take an average of my reading tastes, I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
See, my favorite thing about speculative fiction is the way in which it takes the shackles off of an author to contemplate scenarios and what that would do to people, how they would react to that, to things that aren't actually possible. And yet it is possible to imagine, okay, but a human being, if they were placed in a situation like this, if this was possible, if this magic was at their disposal, if the world did work this way, how would humans react to that? And so I don't really care if it's big magic or little magic. I don't care if the magic's coming back. I don't care if the magic's leaving. And I will almost never care about a magic system by itself. Like someone's like, oh, it has a really cool magic system. Okay, cool. But is the author doing something where the characters, like the way the characters use it and interact with it and the situations they're placed in because of it? That's what I'm interested in. So like just a magic system where like the gizmos do these cool things, like I literally don't care. So if the author, like, if a author is a bad author, then they don't necessarily know how to do this. But like, I don't care if the author feels that the magic returning or the magic leaving or whatever the case may be is the thing that will create the situations that will be the most interesting or the most compelling or the most thought-provoking. So I trust the author to determine what magic will facilitate these situations, and if they don't pull it off, well, then they're not a favorite author.
That's so funny. Yeah.
Well, I remember, Liene, you were talking about the Broken Earth trilogy and how, like, from your background with like anthropology, like it's such a good exercise in watching cultures evolve from their like ecosystems and things.
Yeah,
it's a bad paraphrasing of what you said, much better, but I remember you talking about that.
Just that cultures are basically formed around ecological factors. They inform one another, and so the fact that your cultural practices, they don't just like sprout up in a vacuum. Like the reasons behind a certain mode of dress, the reasons behind certain social structures, like if it's more practical to have a polyandrous society versus a polygamous society versus a monogamous society, those are usually like decisions that it, like might now be baked into the culture where no longer the environment requires that, but at one time it did, and that's why this culture formed this way, because it was the most practical choice. And so the way the Broken Earth very like awarely like incorporates how the fact that the earth itself has changed and become a huge factor in people's lives in a way that it's the earth is a character basically in the book, and the apocalypse is a character in the book, and the way that this has like materially affected social structures, hierarchies, cultural practices, the way they dress, the way they talk, the way that what they believe in, who has power. This is all a direct result of their ecological environment.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I do think is cool, but it's interesting because that's also like less of what I loved about the series. I mean, as I said, she just does everything so well. Um
Whatever you're
but
looking for, she's done the
like,
thing.
I mean, seriously, N.K. Jemisin is just the most like I think you can make an argument that she's like the most brilliant speculative fiction author living today.
Certainly that I've encountered.
I mean, she's amazing. I also actually just got done. It's a secret, but by the time this episode goes up, it won't be. But for like a secret TBR vlog, I just got done reading The Killing Moon by her.
That was going to be my
And-
next one, but then my patrons chose 100,000 Kingdoms. So
It was great. I loved it. I mean, the world building is so interesting. I do think it's interesting because, like, yeah, I know it's one of her early works, and her character work is not as good. Like, it's still good, but I do think you can kind of see how much her character development has grown since then. But the world building,
Yeah,
is
that
just
was
so
my
good.
review too. I think
Mm.
it's the first written. Like, that's not the first published, but that's the
Mhm.
first one she put together. At least that's what
Yeah.
she said in a Hugo speech.
That's interesting. I can see that. I mean, it's still amazing. And I mean, for most authors, like, I still gave it 5 stars. It's a great book, but like, I can tell. Oh, I need to silence my phone. Oh, good. All my library holds are available.
congratulations.
Keep it in the podcast.
Okay. um so yeah, no, it's definitely interesting because I feel like the characters are still nuanced and interesting, and I feel like for the average author I would be like, oh yeah, these are great characters, but for her I'm like, this is not quite up to what I've read from you before, but it's still really good.
Yeah, which I mean, like that like brief side quest into rating systems being tricky, because I know that I'll rate a book 3 stars that I think is miles and away better than another book that I've rated 4 stars,
Mhm.
because for that author I know that author can do better, and that author's 4 and 5 stars was way better than this book that I just read. It has to be a 3. However, another book by some other author I might have given a 4, but if I compared the two, the 3 is better.
Your rating system is gonna give me an aneurysm.
I know, right? I can't do that. Like, that's too much for me. I think the main issue for me was like deciding between, is this going to be a 5-star or a 6-star like favorite book of the year? And I landed on 5-star because I'm like, yeah, I did really love it, but N.K. Jemisin can do better, so I'm just gonna make it a 5-star.
I think you're gonna love The Shadowed Sun though, because The
Yeah.
Shadowed Sun, I think, has the character work we're more used to, and I think you're gonna love one of the main characters. That's my prediction.
Okay. I'm excited for it. I bought the second book because I decided I could, because I was reading the first one finally. So yeah, I have a few more of her backlist to read that I have not read yet, and then I'll probably be sad when I'm out of N.K. Jemisin books to read.
You just start over. That's what I did.
I mean, I will also, yes, I will probably also do that.
That's what I do with Joe Abercrombie. I just keep restarting.
Yes. Yeah, I think I feel like, Liana, you do a lot of rereading of your favorites, which I think
I
is
do
interesting.
now. I used to not, because I always felt like I know this is why I do it now and I didn't, but then I felt somehow like it was a waste of time, like progress is not being made. And so I would refuse to do it, and now I was just like, whatever, I wanna. So
Yeah.
Plus there's also like the problem with fantasy is that if you're reading a series, you almost have to reread every time a new installment comes out, because unless you remember it that well, you're...
See, you say that's a problem, but that's why fantasy is one of my favorite genres. But
Well, I mean,
I'm
it's
a
a
compulsive
problem if-
rereader.
It's a problem if you want to get through more new books.
Yeah, no, I don't reread everything, but I will say one of my favorite things is authors who have planned ahead in their series enough that when you go back and reread earlier books, you suddenly see things in a brand new light because of like these breadcrumbs they dropped that like only makes sense given
You mean like when you
information in
finish
later
the
books.
last argument of kings and then you realize that the blade itself and before they are hanged were actually had a
Yes.
plan?
Yes. Like that, or like the Witchland series by Susan Dennard is like this, which I really love. I know you like DNF the series, Lana, which is totally fine, but I love it. It's like one of my favorite series, and it's also one of those ones where every time I go back and reread, I notice new things, and like knowing things from later on in the series suddenly sheds new light on stuff that she planted early on, and I know it's because she had a lot of this planned from the very beginning of writing it, and it makes it really fun.
I think this adds two things onto like my favorite authors list now that I hadn't realized. A favorite author is someone I want to reread because I take a lot of comfort in re-consuming media, TV shows, movies, books. If I want to re-consume your art multiple times, you're probably a favorite. But also like an author with a plan. I do find, and it's not always the case, that authors who kind of just let the story unfurl, which is a totally valid way to make art, don't tend to be my favorite story crafters because I kind of like to feel safer. Like there is a plan that will sustain me to the end. And it can work, but 9 times out of 10, if I didn't like the ending of a book and I'll look at interviews, the author isn't a big outliner or whatever. They kind of just, they have a different method of producing their stories.
I feel like I'm very Goldilocks about this because an author that doesn't plan at all is rarely going to be a favorite of mine. But if an author overplans, then I also don't like it because I feel like they're like so structured that there's no organic flow to how things are developing, and it feels like it's been shoehorned and crammed into fitting this mold that they have pre-planned. So like I feel like there needs to be somewhat of like a baseline kind of framework of generally where this is going, but an author that leaves that like gives themselves grace to change that plan along the way if the characters have led them somewhere else.
Yeah, I think there needs to be adaptability and flexibility, but I also like don't like when like the last book in the series introduces something very pivotal that it's like the 7th book in a series, and like maybe that should have been talked about a few books earlier. I'm thinking a very specific series right now.
It seemed like it when you said the 7th book.
Yeah, I just, even before talking about Harry Potter was a little taboo, I've had many issues with the 7th book since it came out in the 2000s. I've had a lot of issues.
Well, I mean, the thing there too is also, it's just just admit it if you're a pantser. The fact that in interviews she would always insist that she had planned this, and you're like, lady, we can read, like we can see that you did not plan this. Why don't you? There's no shame in that. You don't have to have planned this.
No, yeah, people try to be like, oh, there were things. There's like, no. These were made up. These were made up here.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it especially stands out when you're talking about lengthy fantasy series. Like, I don't mind for shorter, for like, you know, a standalone or a duology or whatever. Like, I don't really care if the author is more of a pantser. That doesn't bother me. But for a lengthy series, if I'm investing like a lot of time in many books, like you need to know how you're ending the story and where you're going with it.
It's also, I mean, it's been interesting as the reader, and also then to hear the perspective from the author on how it is to write. Watching Pierce Brown step into the territory of having multiple perspectives, because as he himself said, you can't wing that because you have to plan which perspective is going to show you which thing and how they're going to intersect and when they're going to intersect and which one you're going to show in what order, and like you can't wing that. So he's had to do a lot more planning than he's used to because he is very much a pantser. So it's been interesting. I mean, his books are getting to be like insanely long because it turns out that he just writes the same amount for each character as he used to write for one character, but it's now 4 characters in one book. You're like, sir.
They are ginormous books.
Yeah, which is why I still haven't continued. I need to. I
just finished my reread of Dark Age.
I haven't even finished Iron Gold yet. Like, I started it at one point and then kind of stopped. They're so long. It's like a real investment. It's one of those things where like I kind of wish I would have somebody making me read it for something, because then I would feel like I have a good excuse.
Well,
I can
maybe if
make
we're
you.
lucky, we'll get the third book next year, and you can just run a read along.
Well,
or
okay,
something.
Pierce
That's true.
Brown tossed away 200 pages of his started manuscript because he thought it was too dark, and he's starting over.
Okay.
Too dark.
When I read Dark Age, I'm like, sir, what was in there? I want to know.
Does he have like a Patreon you can join to get these deleted scenes?
Wouldn't that be great?
Absolutely not. He
Some
doesn't
authors
either.
have those. I almost joined
Yeah.
Yoon Ha Lee's because he was going to write fanfic for two of my favorite
Dang.
characters.
N.K. Jemisin has one. That's what helped her leave her day job.
Pierce
Yeah.
Brown is very cagey and contrary, so I seriously
Yeah.
doubt he'd ever do that.
Fair enough. He just makes merch.
Yeah,
But
with his
Bethany, the
friends.
series you were talking about, The Witchland, is that
Yeah.
the first one, Truth Witch?
Yes. Yeah.
Because I've been curious about reading that one, so now I'm even more excited. Because that's like been my when that last book is on the horizon, I'm going to binge that series.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm planning on doing a read along next year before the last book comes out because I want to.
I will
reread
be
them all.
there.
Okay.
I will join.
Yeah, the thing about that one is I feel like the first book reads more like YA fantasy than the rest of the series does. Because it is technically YA, but I feel like the further you get into it, the more it reads it like it easily could have been aged up into adult fantasy. One thing that I think not everybody likes is that it's multiple perspectives and each book sort of focuses on the character arc of a different character. Like you'll have arcs that mirror it with lots of different characters, but like people who read the first book and what they want is these specific character arcs that are focused on there sometimes will read later books and then are disappointed because it's focusing on something else.
I'm pretty flexible.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I mean,
Isn't
I'm
that kinda
expecting
what
it, and you
Sanderson
can
is
tell me
doing
if
with-
I'm wrong, but Throne of Glass trajectory in that the first book I'm not going to like that much because it is going to be a little too traditional young adult for me, like I don't know, older young adult. I don't know how to phrase it, but like whatever Throne of Glass was.
Yeah,
and then
I mean,
will-
it's like I enjoyed it, but also like she started writing it when she was like 15. Like it's not polished either. You know? Yeah.
I'm expecting pleasure read from this. I think that's another thing for favorite authors is sometimes I want the thematic journey that Jemisin provides that she also pairs wonderfully with entertainment. But sometimes if an author just entertains me, that's all they need to do.
Same.
So,
yeah, same. Liana, I know I feel like you get more bothered by stuff, which is completely valid. But yeah, it is always interesting to me. Like I feel like frequently I'll see you really, really dislike things that I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, I thought it was fine, but cool.
but then she goes around and likes Terry Goodkind, which I'm sure is fine, but would put in the pleasure read category where I'm just not used to you liking.
Yeah,
Definitely
I mean,
pleasure
and there's
read,
also, of course, like I sincerely don't know what I would think of it if I picked it up for the very first time. Now, I don't think I would hate it. I really don't. But I'm sure some part of it is nostalgia.
Yeah. We have a whole episode on Terry Goodkind.
Me too.
Because we both really enjoy those books. He was an interesting character.
But I mean, like going back to he wasn't who I was thinking of at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, when I was talking about, an author putting characters into a situation that is made possible by the speculative nature of their work, a lot of, I feel like when I've heard criticisms of Terry Goodkind's work, and the criticisms are many and they are various and they are often very valid, but a lot of it is kind of coming from this magic is, derivative and it doesn't make sense, or it's cliche, or the names are stupid, or whatever. And all that's true, but I mean, I'm mainly here to see the characters and how they're responding to the situation they're placed in. It's kind of like the Kobayashi Maru. Like, I don't care about the game. I care about seeing how this person is reacting to the game. So I think that is kind of his focus as an author for reasons that are also problematic. But nevertheless, that was kind of where his head was at, was like, I'm constructing this world and this situation in order to have these characters react to it and see how these humans interact and react. And that is what I find the most interesting. So he's just where his eye is at is something that I find more compelling.
I mean, I adore his characters and I find his plots fun. Kind of silly maybe, but like fun. They're a lot of fun. They're a lot of fun. Yeah. Not serious, but yeah. Yeah, it is interesting like how you think of favorite authors. Well, and then I think that there's there are authors who, like, would I call them a favorite if I was thinking like a top 10 or whatever? Some authors, maybe not, but I'll read everything that they write. So, like, I think for me, Sarah J. Maas is probably a great example of this, is like, I don't know that I would call her one of my top favorite authors, but I really enjoy her books and I will pretty much read anything she writes. So,
Yeah, I have.
yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, mine is like Nnedi Okorafor, where I haven't had higher than a 4-star for my experience with her works, but like her ideas are always so cool, so I keep picking up her books.
Yeah. 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 Well, and I think similarly, like, Sarah J. Maas occasionally will surprise me with something that I'll end up loving. Like A Court of Silver Flames did that for me, where I was like, oh, I thought this would be fun, and then I cried and really loved it a lot. But usually it's like, yeah, this was fun.
You know exactly what you're getting normally with a Sarah J. Maas book, and I respect that. I respect that a lot.
Yeah. You do. I mean, like, you know what you're getting. And that's why I tell people, I'm like, look, if you don't like what she does, then that's fine. I get it. Don't read it.
No, yeah, I mean, I sometimes pick up a Sarah J. Maas book because I'm like, I need this level of escapism. I need this level of character tropes. Like, I want what she brings consistently to the table, because what she chooses to do, she does well, except sometimes, and I think this was for me the case at A Court of Silver Flames, her attempt at providing a plot with stakes did not work for me.
I just ignore that part.
I know, but this one was particularly egregious, okay?
I mean, fair. You know what I think the thing is like, I just kind of ignored those parts. I didn't really, I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. But like, because I was so invested in the internal journey of the main character, like, it didn't bother me. But you're not wrong. Like, she does. So like, there is so much, like, plenty of valid criticism to be made. And like, Kingdom of Ash,
I just can't let myself read last books in Sarah J. Maas series. I just need to.
You know what? Okay, it's actually a really good wrap up. It just should have been like 300 pages shorter. And also, she shouldn't try to write battle scenes. Like, she's not good at writing battle scenes.
This was an author that I would never have read on my own, but it was my best friend's favorite author, because I'm a good friend and I'll do these things, and I didn't know that you could DNF anything. I didn't know that was possible once I was 3 books in, and then you meet a character that I like, so I just kept going.
Yeah.
But no, not a favorite author, but I have read, I think, all of her books except for the novella that everyone tells me to skip, so I just don't.
Yeah, you can definitely skip it. I have read it, though.
It just, like, maybe one Christmas if I'm feeling it, but it has to be very specific.
Oh, man. And Liene is just like, I'm not saying anything.
Liene, what's your, like, pleasure read? Like, only brings you joy. No other redeeming quality.
I mean, I'm kind of a masochist, so what brings me joy is usually misery. Like, I have the most fun reading Joe Abercrombie. That's why I reread his books all the time.
Fair.
I'm just living my best life.
Hey, well, it's funny because, like, I like what Joe Abercrombie does, but he's so far, I don't think he's an author that I would reread a lot, because it is, like, darker, you know? Yeah, I mean, like, I would eventually, but it would be a while, because it's like his books are, I don't like that, like, they're less fun for me, I guess. Like, there's parts of it that are.
I feel like his ability to write unique characters, where each one is a unique individual that comes out alive, off the page, and has unique turns of phrase and has incredible interactions with everybody else, and it all feels so grittily real and lived in. There's no one else that really delivers on that level. Like, he is the greatest of all time when it comes to character work. That's just a fact. So, and since I love character work,
we start the podcast with artist subjective. Beauty is the eye of the beholder. No facts. He is the best at characters.
I mean, you may not like the characters he's written, but like to constantly write so many characters and they're all unique individuals. Nobody's a cardboard cutout to fill out the scene. Everybody's a fully fleshed out human being with a distinct voice. Like there's just nobody else that's doing it on his level.
Yeah, I mean, if he wrote a book that was all Glocta, I would probably reread it.
Well, you can always just, and once it's a reread, then you don't have to read the other chapters.
That's
you
true.
Know what
I can
happens in
just
them,
skip
so you just
all the
fast
other
forward,
characters and just read the Glocta scenes.
Yeah, exactly.
It was funny on my reread because I was rereading it and I knew approximately what would happen, but honestly, because the plot is minimal, like I didn't quite remember the big moments, but I was like remembering, like Logan, you meet him, and I'm just like, oh man, yeah, I like Logan. I feel like bad things are going to happen, and like I don't remember what, but I shouldn't hold on to this feeling.
I was gonna say you can open any chapter in any Abercrombie book and just confidently say like, bad things are gonna happen.
Well, because it was like 5 years between the rereads. So.
Yeah. Okay, so who would you say is your most reread author? Liene, I'm guessing Abercrombie for you.
Well, it depends on how you count it. So, like, I'm about to read The Wolf for the 5th time, but Leo Caro's only written The Wolf and the Spider. So Joe Abercrombie has just written more books, and I've reread all of them. So it depends on how you count it.
Okay.
I've reread Brandon Sanderson the most.
Okay. So I think Tamora Pierce is probably...
Well, then there's also Ella Enchanted, which I read 17 times, so probably.
No, I think I've read almost every Sanderson 4+ times now, maybe 3+.
Wow. Okay.
Well, I mean, so remember, this was before I knew that there were more books than what the bookstore had on the shelf, and they only had like all the Terrys. Like all the Terrys, like 3 Terrys. No. There's Terry Goodkind, there's Terry Brooks, there's Terry Pratchett, like all the Terrys.
Yep, all the Terrys.
And they had A Song of Ice and Fire, Sanderson, and this was back when Sanderson only had 4 books. So he was like the new guy on the block back when I read him. So I don't know, I just started reading him in 2005 and it's 2021, so I guess it's my comfort read. I'm on reading Hero of Ages right now. Like I'm having a great time.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel like what has been that for many, many years for me has been Tamora Pierce, because like the number of times I've reread the Song of the Lioness Quartet and the Circle of Magic quartets is many. So yeah, I love her. I mean, I started reading her stuff when I was like 11, 12, something like that, and they still hold up pretty dang well.
That series is my biggest regret, that a bookseller, when I asked for books to read, didn't recommend that one. Because I never read it, like, of the age. And I mean, I do plan to read it one day. But, like, it sounds like it sounds like it would have been, like, a perfect series for me.
Yeah.
Like, I have read, like, Harry Potter, His Dark Materials. Like, Aragon's not a favorite, but I read that. So I read, like, those.
Yeah. I mean, they're great. I love them a lot. So
at that age I was mainly reading the Redwall books, I think.
Yeah, I didn't like books with animal protagonists.
Same, Bethany. I avoided it too. And I never read the Cat Warrior books, even though I own so many cats, but like I never could do it.
I'm glad it's not just me. My friends all thought it was really weird, and I was like, yeah, I don't want to read books where animals are the main character.
No, I think those are the reasons too, but I don't have as much regret over skipping Redwall. I think Tamora Pierce I legit just didn't know existed until I was like 20.
Yeah. So. I mean, still worth going back and rereading. I've been like slowly acquiring more of her books. Some of them are out of print and harder to get a hold of, so I've been like trying to kind of amass a mini library of some of my favorites. So
what do you guys do when you think you found a new favorite author? I get very excited when this happens.
When you say what do we do, I mean, what is there to do? You throw a party, invite people over?
I just post on the internet a lot of it.
I mean, buy all of their books. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I buy all the books and then forget to read them.
Oh,
but
yeah. I mean, I feel like after I finished the Broken Earth trilogy, I was like, N.K. Jemisin is definitely a new favorite author because she's amazing. And then I've been like slowly reading her backlist.
I also, I mean, I have to say, I feel like there's a point, there's this in-between zone where like I think someone's a favorite author because I've just read a book or I've just finished a trilogy or something, and I'm like riding this high and I'm like, well that was very good. But then I'm a little bit afraid to read anything else by them because what if it's not as good? What if it was just that? What if I'll be disappointed? What if they aren't a favorite author? And so I have to like do that. I have to like finally like bite the bullet and read something else by them and test that water. And then if I still love it, well, now they're a favorite author and now I'll never feel scared again. Even if I end up being disappointed, I will be confidently picking up everything they read and won't be like, but what if it's bad?
Yeah. What's happened to me a lot, not all the time, but frequently with YA fantasy has been where I'll read a first book from an author and love it and be very excited and then read the next book and it's disappointing. And I do like, I don't know what you guys think about this, but this is a thing that I sometimes wonder about because especially in YA, publishing timelines are really quick. Like they want authors putting a book out like once a year. And so they really push authors to finish things quickly.
Patrick Rothfuss could never write YA.
No. You would die. No. But I do wonder because I think sometimes you get these debut authors who've had like, you know, been working on their first book for 5 or 10 years and it's great. And then they have to suddenly turn around and write a second book in, you know, a matter of months or a year or whatever. And it's not great. And I just wonder if it does a disservice to some of these new fantasy authors because I've just seen this happen a lot recently.
I'm sure I'm sure it's not
partially
true for every single time that it's bad, but I'm sure at least some part of the time that is a factor.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's partially why, like, I've been liking the duology trend in YA, because I don't have to wait as long to hear if people like the completed work. Because I definitely, like, because I'm a pickier young adult reader than an adult reader, I try not to start too many young adult series. Like, I still do, but I try not to.
Yeah.
Like, and then I get really excited. Like one of your wrap-ups, you said Illusionary was the last book in that series by Zarida Cordova, and I was just like so pumped.
Yeah.
Because I think also the series can be stretched too long. Like I get the most middle book syndrome when I read a YA trilogy.
Yeah.
It can still happen in adult, but I get it more often in YA.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. You know, Zarida Cordova is an interesting author to talk about actually, because she is an author who is very, very consistent. Like, I never dislike her books, but I also never adore her books. I don't think I've ever given a book of hers 5 stars, but I've never given it below a 3 star. It's always like 3, and it's almost always like, it's almost always 4 stars, sometimes 3.5. But it's just interesting because I'm like, I always really like her books. Like, they're very consistent in quality. Her plots are good. Her characters are good. I think her books are a little more plot driven than I prefer. Like, I always want more time with the characters, which might be why I don't totally love them. But they're always like high quality, you know?
Yeah, I mean, like Incendiary was the first like tropey young adult book I had read in a long time that scratched all of my itches in the way that I wanted it to.
Yeah.
Like, I think she did what I needed it to be for like what I typically go into young adult thinking for like the faster paced story, and it had all like, I don't know, my heart rate was very elevated for the first 100 pages.
Yeah.
And the number of times that's happened in a young adult book, even when I was of age, is minimal. So it was just, I'm excited to finally get to Illusionary. And I think her first adult book's coming out.
Yes,
so I'm very excited.
I'm very excited to read that. Well, her first one under that name. She has written adult, like, steamy romance under a pen name.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm really excited about that too. The Orchidea Divina one. I'll put it in the show notes. But yeah, and the second book in this series, Illusionary, is really, I think it's a really good ending to the series too. I think it's a good wrap up. I think I gave both books 4 stars.
That's what I predict I'll do too. But like, I don't have an issue reading a book and knowing it'll be 4 stars.
Yeah.
I have issues reading a book and like when I know that it's going to be like a 2.5 or 3 star, like that's when I feel like I need to commit to DNFing more.
Yes, it's so freeing. I highly recommend it.
I just don't like it. It depends, because normally those books for me are the fast books that don't take me long to read, because I've learned that like I just need to give up on plot-paced books. I'm just not that person anymore. So.
Interesting. Liana, we haven't heard from you in a while, so I just wanted to...
I haven't read anything by Zarida Cordova,
That's
so I have no idea. Like, that sounds nice.
Fair enough.
I have no clue if she would like it, Zarida Cordova. It's a very tropey young adult book, but you like some tropey young adult books, so I don't know.
I have Incendiary because I got it from a book box when it came out.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you might... It's like her... I'd be curious to see how you do with it. Because, like, it's,
I hear that from you a lot as well.
Because I never know. Like, I never really know how you're going to feel about stuff. I feel like her books are, like, always very competently written, and she has good plots. They are melodramatic, and they're very, they're very YA tropey books. But I feel like her writing is just really consistent.
I feel like I heard
and it's also short. Like, it doesn't overstay its welcome.
Really?
Yeah, or I think it was just a specific thing, because she was ranting about a thing that characters do that she finds annoying, and it was clear that she had a very recent something in mind, and we were like, well, what are you talking about? Like, where did this just happen? And I'm pretty sure it was Incendiary.
I mean, it's true. Well, this is the thing, is like, I do think there are typical YA tropes that some adult readers find irritating.
It was something to do with and so you can tell me now, like, if I'm misremembering, if you're like, well, that doesn't happen in Incendiary, but it's something to do with, like, a character harboring guilt over something when you as the reader are like, well, you were clearly in the right, like, you didn't do anything wrong, can you stop, can you knock it off with but I'm a monster because I did this terrible thing, but it was like self-defense, and you're like,
okay, but I think that's I think that's handled very well, and it makes a lot of sense.
So that it was Incendiary.
Yeah, I agree with you, Angela, though. Like, I do think it was handled well, and it did make sense for the character.
And, like, I had a friend who was reading it who, like, suffers from the mental health stuff that is in that character and said it was done really well. So, like, it wasn't, at least to the person who had the same thing, like, just tropey. It was actually, like, a good representation of that.
Yeah.
So.
But yes, it would have been that book, but...
Like, I'm not misremembering at the very least.
No.
It was
I mean, it is tropey. I have a friend who doesn't want to read it because, like, it has a mini makeover scene, which I know happens in young adult.
Okay, this already sounds like my worst nightmare.
I like a makeover scene.
I sometimes tropes are meant for comfort, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Oh, man. That's funny.
But...
Angela, did you answer this of, like, most reread?
I said Brandon
Sanderson. You did. Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I want to get Jemison numbers up there, but it's going to take a little longer to catch up.
Her books take me a little longer to read than typical books. Like, which was interesting, because this is what happened with The Killing Moon, where I was like, oh, maybe, like, it's not that long. Maybe I can just, like, read it in a day. And then I was like, no, I definitely can't. It took me like 3 days in chunks. Like, I read other books those days also, but like, I couldn't just sit and read it all the way through. I really liked it, but there's a lot going on and a lot to unpack in her writing, and I feel like it always just takes me a little while. I enjoy it.
But also, like, they are good to, like, read a bit of it, get the intrigue moment, and, like, ruminate on it while you do other things.
Yes.
Like, you don't need to get it all at once. You can, like, I buddy read The Killing Moon, and we all had all these insane theories, and we kept voxering about, like, who do we think's doing this, or what do we fun. Like, it was fun to theorize.
Yeah, that sounds like fun.
So the downside so it's really exciting when you're in the honeymoon phase, when you've just met your new favorite author, and you've committed, and you've bought all their books, and now you're chewing your way through them, and then you catch up, and now you have no more.
Yeah.
Then you're sad.
Yeah.
And then you just reread.
You know,
that's why I haven't read Emergency Skin yet. It's my last Jemison.
Oh man, that's probably why I've been, like, parsing them out and not jumping through all of them Yep. Like, I read The 100,000 Kingdoms, but I haven't continued on with that trilogy, so I still have the last 2 books in that to read, and I have The Shadowed Sun. And that's it. I've read all of her other stuff. So.
You haven't read the novella after the 3rd book in the Inheritance trilogy, which I really like that novella.
Okay.
Awakened God or something.
Yeah.
It's a very cute novella.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't read that, but But I've read a lot of her books, so
because they're all so good and so different, and the
so,
covers are all colorful and nice to have on your shelf.
Yeah, they're so good.
I still just I love Orbit. Orbit is probably we're not talking favorite publishers, but right now is probably my favorite publisher. But I hate that they're mainly a paperback publisher.
Yeah,
I want more hardbacks.
They do some hardbacks.
First Law.
And City We Became was hardback.
Yeah, but that's the only Jemison. Well, then the short story collection that came out in hardback.
Well, those are also her last 2 releases, so I think she's gotten popular. And I think that's the thing is they do hardback releases for their really top sellers, but I think Jemison is probably now getting to that point.
I also get confused because the Bone Shard Daughter and the Unbroken were both debuts, but the Bone Shard Daughter got a hardcover and the Unbroken didn't. And I like the Unbroken way more, but that's just me.
Bone Shard Daughter got a Barnes & Noble book club thing.
Okay, there it is. There's the capitalism.
Yeah, so that's probably why.
But no, I mean, I think Orbit hits it out of the park for me. My favorite fantasy, mostly from Orbit.
I really like them a lot. I'm also a big fan of Tor.com.
Yeah.
I like a lot of what they do, but...
I realized recently that Tor and Tor.com are different things, because I'm not very in the loop.
Yeah. I mean, there's crossover, a lot of the publicists will work across both, but yeah, the editors and what they put out is different. Tor.com is edgier and they do more short form fiction, and yeah. I like them. They also send me a lot of stuff, which I appreciate.
I'm just looking at all the spines of my books now going, who published which ones? I never pay attention.
Leanna's like, I don't read things for review, so I don't pay attention to this.
I've literally never requested a review copy.
I only started noticing Orbit because, if you do look at my bookshelves, I think everything but the Sanderson books might be. Well, and I have some Solaris.
Yeah.
I like Solaris, too.
Yeah,
I kind of have my shelves organized by size and type, and I have a bunch of, the same size paperbacks, obviously, together right across from me, and sure enough, a bunch of them are Orbit, as you were saying, they're mainly paperback.
Yeah. Well, I now organize most of my sci-fi fantasy books by publisher.
It helps for height, at least for me. I like to organize things by height.
They look nice together.
I was gonna say, that was not my intention, but that's kind of the result of the fact that I've been organizing it by the size, because that is the natural result of that.
Yeah. I mean, I just enjoy how it looks. So I have all more Orbit books together and my Tor books together and my Tor.com books together. And then it's always annoying because sometimes, they change their logo.
Yes.
And then I'm like, now they don't all match. It's fine.
It's
and
not
sometimes
fine.
the sizes don't match, even if it is the same publisher.
That is true.
Orbit does that. I don't like that. Why? Why?
Yep, that is true. I also have my Book of the Month Club books together.
I think I keep avoiding Book of the Month because I don't like the logo.
You know what, though? It looks cool if you shelve all of your Book of the Month Club books together.
That's fair.
Then they look nice because they look like a set. So that's what I do. Once I read them, I have my unread Book of the Month Club shelf.
That's literally what I do. I have an unread Book of the Month and a
Yeah.
read, and it's just this proud moment.
Yeah,
I just get so happy when I get to move it over from the unread to the read, and I'm like, haha,
well, the
another
thing
one
is,
down.
Is if I don't rate it high enough, it doesn't get to go to the red shelf. It gets on hold. I resell it at my indie bookstore. Nice. So, yeah. So I'm always like, are you going to make it to my red Book of the Month Club shelf, or are you going to go to somebody else's?
Another one bites the dust. You're like the other part of that Bachelor commercial for the Book of the Month.
Oh, man. That's so funny. Okay, so I think we've been talking long enough. We should probably also talk about upcoming book releases, since this conversation is going all over the place, which is fine. But we're going to move on to On My Radar, which is where we talk about recent or upcoming book releases in sci-fi, fantasy, and romance. Also, I'm realizing I did not adequately prepare for this. I have a list of them and I forgot to write down things about them, so I am just going to do this slightly more off the cuff than usual. That's fine. So the books for today's episode that I'm going to be talking about are going to be released between July 20th and August 2nd, 2021, with the exception of guest recommendations, which might include any upcoming release. So July 20th, this is not even accurate. Why? Okay, so I put July 20th, but I'm realizing now that the release date has since changed and this book is already out, but we're still going to talk about it. It's fine. So originally to be published on July 20th was Half Sick of Shadows by Laura Sebastian. Instead, they moved it up to July 6th, so it's out, and I am currently reading it. It is a retelling of The Lady of Shalott from the Lady of Shalott, Elaine's perspective. It's a adult fantasy, so she's written some YA fantasy. This is her adult fantasy debut, and it's dealing with like mental health issues. So far, I'm into it. I'm liking it. So actually coming out on July 20th is These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan. And this one is being pitched as Cruel Prince meets A Court of Thorns and Roses. It's a sexy, action-packed fantasy about a girl who is caught between two treacherous fairy courts and their dangerously seductive princes. So this I'm intrigued by. I haven't read it yet, but I'm kind of waiting to see what the reviews on this one are because it sounds interesting. Then on July 27th, I've got two books coming out to talk about. First up is The Viscount Made Me Do It by Diana Quincy. This is a historical romance. And what's interesting about this one is that the heroine is of Arab descent, as is the author, and she works as a bone setter, which is pretty interesting. This was looked down on at the time as like not real medicine, but obviously they actually did kind of know what they were doing. And yeah, I liked this. I thought it had like some interesting fresh things that it was bringing to the genre. And then lastly, on July 27th, we also have Small Favors by Aaron A. Craig coming out. This one I read and was very into. It's kind of a quiet, slow-paced horror novel. It's YA. It's set in this small kind of frontier town with kind of weird, mysterious mythology surrounding the origins of the town, and weird stuff is starting to happen. So like animals are getting born deformed, and plants are like crops are rotting before they can get plucked, and like strangers are coming and weird stuff is happening. And it's following this young woman who is just trying to survive and take care of her family. And I really enjoyed it. It's like a quiet, slow horror. So if you want something that's not super scary but very creepy and atmospheric, this is a great one to check out. So those are my new releases I wanted to talk about. Angela, Liana, do you have anything you want to share?
Yeah, we already mentioned it in the earlier part of the podcast, but I think September 7th, The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina by Zarida Cordova is very much on my radar, mainly because I think it's a standalone fantasy. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen
I think you're right.
I think it's standalone. I think they go to Ecuador, which I really love going to other countries, and it seems like a family that has a secret, but the family members don't know that secret, and they're like discovering it. I don't want to like look too much more into it, but like we've talked about in the podcast, I really trust her writing, and I want to see, I don't know what this is. I'm also just always looking for Latinx adult fantasy. Like I will just read anything that has that for it.
Love it.
I finally get to say this. I've been waiting all year. The third and final book in the Age of Madness trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, The Wisdom of Crowds, comes out September 14th. So if you have been holding off on starting his new trilogy, now is the time. Just in time. You can totally catch up and be ready for when the third one comes out.
Yeah, do it. I love it. I have a long way to go before I get there, but one day.
Because you can't skip any of the books. Don't think about it.
That is.
One day I'll pick up Best Served Cold. It'll happen.
Yeah, I want to do it sooner than later. Maybe we could read that, Angela, if you're interested anytime sooner. But
I mean, it'll probably encourage me to do it sooner, so we probably
do
should
it.
try and figure it out.
Okay, we could do it. We could buddy read it. I'm down. I have it on audio and physical book, so
I have to get the physical because the audio and me have not been friends. So.
Gotcha. Okay, well, let's do that. Great. thank you. Everybody check these out. All of the books, as always, will be in the show notes. Again, this has been Chapter 3 Podcast, and I'm your host, Bethany. You can follow us on Twitter at Chapter 3 Podcast and on TikTok, also a Chapter 3 Podcast. You can find me on YouTube at Beautifully Bookish Bethany, talking about books all the time. The next episode is going to be available in 2 weeks, and this episode's bonus content will be available to patrons in the next few days. Thanks for listening.